Welcome to Living Eternity Now. Today I have an essential study for us concerning the origin of our crises as a nation and worldwide. It is being presented to us by the internationally known, incredible psychoanalyst and social scientist Norberto Cappi. He is going to reveal to us, in an uncanny manner, the difference between a real economy of a nation, the workforce, and market economy, and what happens when we adopt a market economy as the basis of our lives. This study is not difficult to understand, but is very difficult to accept the erroneous direction we have taken in our lives. But in accepting that, then the solutions to the problem become apparent. So sit back, get concentrated, and enjoy.
Hello, my name is Gilbert Gambucci, and since 1984, I have been working with the most exact science that we have on our planet. We have been bringing solutions to the worst social problems that we had been experiencing. We work from the premise that how can you solve a problem of which you are unaware? That is, how can you solve a problem if you don't know the exact cause, the origin of the problem? And today I'm going to show you what is the origin of this crisis that we are experiencing in the United States and worldwide as a result. I work very closely with the Austrian-Brazilian psychoanalyst, social scientist Norberto Cappi. So I propose that as often as I can, I will bring to you a scientific analysis of the most pressing current event problem that we have. And, even if you have billions and billions of dollars to throw out there, it won't work unless you know what is the exact cause of this crisis. We will analyze this for you today. Today, you're going to receive a consciousness that no one has. Okay, you are going to have it today. So in order to accomplish this for you, I've selected some excerpts from Norberto Cappi's television programs. These programs are translated into 8 different languages and are aired in more than 40 different countries worldwide. And the native language of Dr. Cappi is Portuguese. And as I live here in Brazil, where I'm presently speaking to you from, I speak Portuguese, and I've taken the liberty to dub these into English, so that the internet, the international community, so that we can take advantage of the insights that Cappi has for us.
I would like to talk about the beginning of this downfall, because we have been talking about this for a long time now. That when we opened our office in New York, it was a new period that had been inaugurated by Ronald Reagan, where he reinforced speculation, placing the stock exchange in a predominant position in American economy. Instead of continuing to produce machinery, produce agriculture, international commerce, the Americans began to bet more on the stock markets. In Chicago, which is the market dealing with food and livestock, and the stock exchange in New York, which is more the bonds, actions, this type of trading. So Ronald Reagan established a new way of making money because the country was going through economic difficulties and wasn't selling nearly as many machines. Industry wasn't as good as the Japanese industry, nor European industries. In fact, they began to sell less cars than other countries, and the dangers of a debacle in sight related to the sale of materials
such as metals and the sale of agricultural products, etc. And so they began to manufacture money. So Reagan followed Friedman, the couple, Rose and her husband. In fact, they received a Nobel Prize in Sweden. So they began to eliminate the American industries, commerce, and even agriculture. So the American economy became the worth of the properties they had, like their homes, etc. But this isn't a real economy. This is a market economy, a false economy. And this is the decadence that we refer to, that the United States passed from a huge productivity to a form of gambling on the stock exchange. And many people entered into this tendency of making money with money to get more money. All of this.
Now, in the 80s, the scientist Kepi was living and working in the United States. And during that time, one of the books that he wrote, he's going to be showing you in this next excerpt. We call it the Decay book. And this book was written very much in the spirit of the late President John Kennedy, who said that a free society is a critical society. That is to say, it's good to bring up the real problems, analyze them, in order to resolve them and move forward into what Kennedy would call the new frontier. Now, what is interesting is that these problems that were analyzed in this book in the 80s are exactly the same problems that we're having today, which shows that we do not yet have consciousness of the origin of the problem. I'm going to quote from this book, page 49. Actually, Kepi is citing an editor from Southern Illinois who wrote an article entitled Jolly Green Giants from the Progressive magazine. Look at this. The United States lost 34,000 farms in 1982. 34,000 farms in 1 year. And this was the tendency of what was happening during this decade. According to government statistics, these farmers were victims of a few multinational marketing companies and the banks. So this shows one of the types of problems that was occurring at this time. Take a look at the next excerpt.
In 1984, I wrote a book about the decay of the American people and of the United States. So I wrote it to show that this politics of Reaganomics, speculation, would destroy that country because it would lead the people to stop working, and industry would stop producing, and agriculture would go bankrupt. And this has, in fact, happened. They put all their industry into other countries and installed a process of buying all their food from other countries. So due to this, we've seen the end of American agriculture, which had produced the real economy.
I thought it would be helpful for us to take a look at a list of the worst stock market crashes in history. There have been some others that they call serious slumps and dives, but this list, essentially, it's the worst ones. Let's take a look. You see, in 1894, this was the first big crash ever. Then, in 1929, this was the famous Black Thursday that brought on the Great Depression that was at least for 10 years. There was another big crash in 1973. The thing I would like to point out to you is, look, since Reaganomics, do you see this? Do you remember this big crash in 87 that they called Black Monday? And look, after that, it's just one after another, consecutively, without stopping until it's every year and less than each year. Look at this. So what we want to see is why, since the 80s, has the economy of the United States become so weakened? And how has the even the speculative market become so unstable? Now look, You know, there's a difference between economy and finances. Okay, in these next couple of excerpts, Kepi is going to talk about this. So from this perspective, we're going to get to a deeper analysis of our crises. Let's take a look.
The stock exchange is comprised of a financial process which is a result of the fundamental economy. The real economy is in productivity, and we can say that the productivity is generating the money that is generally invested back into the stock market. And when it is invested in the stock market, these shares are then bought or sold. And it's in the buying and selling of these shares that fabulous profits are made by investors. But the country doesn't profit anything from this because the huge banks, the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, for example, it's privately owned. So the country is the one that ends up depending on private entities. It's not the country that is printing money, not at all. The ones who make the money, who deal with finance, are in the private sector, the owners of these banks. They have made a market economy. This market economy is what is causing all these upheavals in that country, and which can cause the same throughout the world. Now what happens? When this false economy falls, the real economy will arise, and it will generate a lot of well-being, even to the American people. So you can notice that a fall in the stock market is fundamental because, for example, the Chicago Exchange determines the value of food throughout the entire world. And we're experiencing big increases in prices, which is making it impossible for some countries to buy food. Countries that don't produce food need to buy from others that do. But they can't due to the very high prices. And also gasoline. Petroleum is now 120 a barrel. So all the economy disappears into the hands of the speculators.
Now, if economy is not to be understood by anybody, that's because there's something very deceitful going on behind the scenes, something very corrupt, very masked, so that we can't perceive what is going on. And you know, market economy is something that happens inside of a real economy, not the other way around. Or this idea of a credit economy. Credit economy is what? Putting us in debt to the bankers. This is an orientation that comes from the bankers so that we become dependent to the bankers. A real economy doesn't need to be dependent on bankers. Do you perceive the trick here? So, you know, if we want our country back, we're going to have to learn very quickly how to live without going into debt, how to have a lifestyle whereby we stop spending what we don't have, in order for us not to go into debt to anybody. Therefore, no one will own us. Let's take a look at the next excerpt.
The stock market worked with an amount of money that was more than $40 trillion. But in reality, what the world really has that is actually being used, that's functioning country by country, is only 14 trillion. So there is a huge gap here of $26 trillion of money that doesn't exist other than in the imagination of these delirious people. So the fall of the stock exchange will favor the return of the human being to having a normal life. Therefore, we should even commemorate this fall. Now look, there is a difference between economy and finances. Take a look.
Economy and finances. First, the economy is the result of the value that a country produces.
You see, the economy, its money, the goods that a nation has, comes from work, which comes mainly from industry, from agriculture, and also from commerce. It's the result. Therefore, the real money of the nations are these 14 trillion that exist in the entire world. This other 26 trillion does not exist. It's just pure speculation. And secondly,
Finance deals with establishing prices of what a country buys and sells.
that is, if an individual has a stock, an action, that is worth 10, in the stock exchange he can artificially elevate this to 20 or 30. But in reality, it's not worth 20 or 30, it's worth only 10. Therefore, the stock exchange creates an artificiality, and this perturbs people's minds. Even those who don't play the stock exchange get upset with what's happening. Look now in third place.
If finances become stronger than the economy, then this topples the nation. Observation: the stock exchange has become dangerous because it cannot support itself.
If half the people who have money in the banks take their money out one day, the bank doesn't have the money to pay the client. In other words, they'll go bankrupt.
Kepi said, if finances becomes greater than economy, this topples a nation. So what happens when the speculative stock market becomes greater than the workforce of a nation? I'm going to quote to you from another book that Kepi wrote while living in the United States in the 80s, called Work and Capital. And if you can understand this, you will perceive why we are in this crisis that we are in, and what is it exactly. I'm reading from page 71. The point I wish to make is that all wealth, whatever its amount, has its source in some activity. Thus, if the level of speculation increases greatly, simultaneously, those at the other end of the process, the workers, become poorer. And as the latter become devastated, the means used to generate money with money will also eventually be decimated and all collapse at the same time, as is now happening.
So the human being cannot be subordinate to money, which is what is happening nowadays. So much so that the richest people, even billionaires, are the most imbalanced people that exist. And this is why the world is in this terrible situation, which can end up in wars, in conflicts, and things like this, all because of the degree of greed that these individuals have, even to the point of wanting all power over humanity.
You know, it seems to me that there are two opposing lines of people in the United States. What the religious community would call the wheat and the chaff. That is to say, there are people who are very much linked to our true heritage as Americans. The Founding Fathers, people like Thomas Jefferson, Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Paine. Okay, and these people, this heritage, produced individuals like Abraham Lincoln, or more in a contemporary time, the Reverend Martin Luther King, John and Robert Kennedy. This type of ideals very much linked to our founding fathers, our true heritage. On the other side, there's an opposing type of character, which I refer to them as economically powerful people. These families that have organized themselves together, they include certain bankers and their secret sect societies. And they are opposed to the ideals of the Founding Fathers. And what I find really interesting is how Thomas Jefferson in his day had a perception of the danger of these people. And look, we're considering a serious quote of a man who was the principal writer of the Constitution of the United States and of the Declaration of Human Rights. This is a great man, Jefferson. Look what he had to say. I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. This is fascinating how Jefferson had consciousness of this problem. And considering that the United States Federal Reserve Bank is privately owned, take a look at this quote of Jefferson. This is more serious. If the American people allow private banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all their property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. Now let's take a look at a little example that Kepi brings up about the true American spirit. Let's see.
Take a look at this sentence that I've written for you here.
Work, per se, is divine.
All work, especially work that is done with dedication, is linked to the divine being and is linked to the core essence of the human being, which is good. One of the reasons why the United States took up the leadership in the world and really became the most developed country was that there, in general, every home, for example, has a workshop in the basement where they do things, build furniture, work with mechanics, whatever. These people like to dedicate themselves to action. So this issue of action is fundamental. In fact, it's fundamental for the human being to develop his own mind.
So what is our solution? We've had in the past as our heritage a very pragmatic way, a very practical way of accomplishing things, coupled together with a very beautiful altruistic philosophy of life, that is, of working in benefit of others, of the society. Not this egoistic, parasitical attitude of taking from society everything that you can, me, everything for me. But this other way of seeing it, that if you contribute to society, then you benefit as a result. Kennedy put it this way, a very interesting way to see it. He said, look, I'm not trying to give people a bigger piece of the pie. I'm trying to make the pie bigger. Do you perceive? The more you contribute to society, the better the society is, the better for everybody, each one of us. So, we can see our solution as being twofold. One, we have to re-immerse ourselves in good action. This spirit of trying to do the best that you can in your work in benefit of others. And secondly, don't spend what you don't have. Don't go into debt to anybody so that the bankers no longer own our country. You know, force yourself into a lifestyle whereby you spend only what you earn. And in this way, this will help to bring back working well, because those who work well earn well. Now, in this next excerpt, look at this very original idea, the benefits of the demise of the stock market speculation. Now look, when we refer to the stock market, we don't mean the whole thing. We're talking about this $26 trillion that doesn't exist, this making money with money that is perturbing everything. This has to fall, this has to finish, this part. Okay, look at this idea.
So now, looking at the issue of speculation,
Benefits that arise with the fall in speculation. The fall of the stock exchange and banks and of speculation is what will save the United States.
exactly, this can save the United States if they notice the fact that the economy is not dependent on the stock market. Take a look now.
This fall in the stock exchange and banks will permit the human being to go back to work again.
And then,
Civilization will have an incredible development and reach Perusia.
Perusia is the period mentioned in the Apocalypse when the world will have 1,000 years of incredible progress and development.
The great era of justice and progress was here referred to by Kepi as Perusia. Different cultures have different names for it. I myself had the privilege of being very happily influenced by the late Reverend Martin Luther King and the way he put it. We are after the promised land. And now we have the science to do that. Now we perceive exactly what is the pathology involved that prevents us from living in the promised land. Individual pathology, the social pathology, and especially the pathology of those with economic power who are opposed to us living in the promised land. Now look, those of us who have more influence in society are obliged to consider what the best of the scientific community is showing to be the reality of our situation. And we, the people, must bring this type of analysis to their attention